For 22 years, I worked the same stretch of highway between Columbus and Cincinnati as a long-haul freight dispatcher. The job kept me tethered to a desk, not the road, which meant I was home every night. Steady hours, steady paycheck, steady life. My wife and I had built something that looked, from the outside, exactly like what two people were supposed to build together. A house in Westerville with a mature oak tree in the front yard, 2 cars in the driveway, a dog named Biscuit who slept at the foot of the bed, 21 years of marriage. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I was not a suspicious man by nature. I did not check her phone. I did not ask questions when she came home late. I trusted her the way you trust the foundation of a house you have lived in for 2 decades without a single crack in the wall. You stop thinking about whether it will hold. You just assume that it will. The first thing I noticed was the gym bag. My wife had never been a gym person. For as long as I had known her, her idea of exercise was walking Biscuit around the block twice before dinner. Then, sometime around last February, she announced she was joining a fitness center over on Polaris Parkway. She said her doctor had told her to get her cardio up. That sounded reasonable. I had no reason to question it. But the gym bag started coming home smelling wrong. I do not mean wrong in an obvious way. I mean wrong in the way that a man who has lived with a woman for 2 decades develops a kind of unconscious fluency with her. The smell of her sweat after real exercise has a particular quality to it. This was different. It was too light, too clean. The bag smelled like she had aired it out, not like she had used it. The clothes inside were damp, but damp like they had been run under a faucet, not soaked through from a real workout. I filed that observation somewhere in the back of my mind and said nothing. Around the same time, she started keeping her phone face down on every surface. Kitchen counter, coffee table, nightstand, always face down. She had never done that before. When I asked her once, casually, why she kept flipping it over, she said the screen brightness bothered her eyes when she was trying to relax. I nodded and let it go. Then came the work dinners. She managed the accounts payable department at a regional insurance firm. She had worked there for 11 years. In all that time, I could count on one hand the number of after-hours work functions she had attended. Suddenly, there were 3 in 6 weeks, always on Tuesdays or Thursdays, always running later than expected. She would come home just past 10, kiss me on the cheek, tell me it had been exhausting, and go straight upstairs to shower before bed. I want to be honest with you. There was a window of maybe 3 or 4 weeks where I told myself I was imagining things. I am a practical man. I do not like drama. I do not like being the kind of person who constructs conspiracies out of small coincidences. So I reasoned with myself. She is getting older and wants to be healthier. Work demands change. People evolve. Leave it alone. What broke through my reasoning was a Saturday morning in March. She had told me she was driving up to her sister's place in Delaware, Ohio for the day. Her sister had recently gone through a knee surgery and needed help around the house. I had no reason to doubt that. She left around 9:30. I spent the morning doing yard work, cleaning the gutters, the kind of tasks that pile up through winter. Around noon, I drove over to the hardware store on State Street to pick up some weather stripping for the back door. In the parking lot of a breakfast restaurant 2 blocks from our house, I saw her car. I recognized the plates before I registered what I was seeing. She was parked in the back corner of the lot, a little removed from the other cars. She was not inside the restaurant. She was in the passenger seat of a silver pickup truck I did not recognize. I could see the back of her head from where I was stopped at the light. I drove home. I sat in the kitchen for a long time with a cup of coffee I never drank. I kept thinking about the gym bag, the phone face down, the work dinners that ran late, all the small things I had filed away and chosen not to examine. And I thought about 21 years, and the oak tree in the front yard, and Biscuit sleeping on the rug in the hallway, and I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. I did not call her. I did not confront her that night when she came home and told me her sister was doing much better and that they had spent the afternoon going through old photo albums. I smiled and said that sounded nice. What I did instead was think carefully. I am a dispatcher. My entire professional life is built around logistics, timing, coordination, contingency planning. If something is happening, I told myself, I need to know the full shape of it before I do anything. Acting on incomplete information is how people make mistakes they cannot take back. So I decided I would find out exactly what I was dealing with before I said a single word. I have a cousin named Gary who spent 15 years as a private investigator before he retired to Hilliard. I called him on a Tuesday, told him what I had observed, and asked him what he would do in my position. He talked me through some options. He also reminded me that Ohio is a one-party consent state for recording, which meant that any conversation I was part of, I could legally record. He told me about a few basic tools available to anyone who wanted to look into their own household network activity. He was not telling me anything I could not have found online, but hearing it from him made it feel more concrete. That weekend, while my wife was running what she called errands, I spent 2 hours going through our home Wi-Fi router's connection logs. I am not a technology professional, but the router interface was not complicated. What I found was that her phone was regularly disconnecting from our home network during hours when she was supposedly home and connecting instead to a mobile data signal. She was switching off Wi-Fi deliberately during certain conversations, so they would not pass through the household network. I also noticed that a messaging app I did not recognize had been installed on her tablet, which she occasionally left on the kitchen counter. I did not open it. I simply noted that it existed and had been used as recently as the evening before. At this point, I called Gary again. He recommended I consult an attorney before I did anything else. That was good advice and I took it. I made an appointment with a family law attorney in Dublin the following Thursday. Told my wife I had a work meeting and spent 90 minutes learning exactly where I stood and what evidence would matter and what would not. The attorney told me 2 things that changed how I approached the situation. First, that documented evidence of infidelity, while not required for a no-fault divorce in Ohio, could become relevant in asset division discussions depending on circumstances. Second, that anything I gathered needed to be done legally or it would work against me. He advised me to keep a written log of dates, times, and observations, and to consult him before taking any further steps. I left that office feeling steadier than I had in weeks. I had a framework. I had a direction. The grief was still there, sitting heavy in my chest every time I looked at my wife across the dinner table and thought about the parking lot on that Saturday morning. But I was not going to let grief make my decisions for me. Here is where the situation clarified itself completely. My wife's firm held its annual regional conference in April. It ran from Wednesday through Friday, overnight at a hotel in downtown Columbus. She had attended this conference before, several times over the years. There was nothing unusual about her going. She packed a bag on Tuesday night, told me she would see me Friday evening, and left Wednesday morning. What she did not know was that I had, 3 days earlier, gone through the GPS history on a family SUV. She was taking her own car to the conference, so this would not track her. But over the past 6 weeks, the SUV's trip history told a story. Tuesday and Thursday evenings when she had supposedly been at work functions. The GPS showed the vehicle parked for 2 to 3 hours at an address in Worthington, about 12 minutes from our house. The same address, 5 separate times. I looked up the address. It was a residential property. I ran the name associated with it through a basic public records search. The name that came back was a man I will call Dwight, 44 years old, worked in commercial real estate, lived alone at that address according to property records. His name appeared in a LinkedIn connection that I then located, which showed he and my wife had been connected professionally for approximately 2 years. I recognized the name the moment I saw it. He had been at her company's holiday party 2 years ago. I'd shaken his hand. He had been pleasant. I had thought nothing of him. I want to tell you how I felt when all of this assembled itself into a clear picture. I had been holding out some small, stubborn corner of hope that I was wrong, that there was an explanation I had not considered, that the woman I had built my life with was not doing what every piece of evidence suggested she was doing. When that last corner closed, it was not explosive. It was more like a door shutting very softly in a quiet house, a sound you feel more than hear. I went back to my attorney. I told him what I had found. He advised me to take no action that could be construed as harassment or surveillance. I had gathered what I needed through legal means. Now I needed to make decisions about what came next. I made several. The first decision was financial. Over the following 2 weeks, while my wife attended her conference and returned home and life continued its surface appearance of normalcy, I began quietly organizing our financial documentation. I made copies of everything: joint accounts, retirement accounts, the mortgage, her car loan that still carried both our names. I moved nothing. I touched nothing. I simply created a complete, organized record that I stored at my brother's house in Gahanna. The second decision involved her closest friend. Her best friend, a woman named Patrice, had been close to my wife for over 15 years. They talked on the phone 2 or 3 times a week. They had vacation together. I had liked Patrice. I had thought of her as genuinely good people. But when I looked back at the timeline, I realized that Patrice had covered for my wife at least twice that I could verify. There had been a Saturday in January when my wife said she was with Patrice shopping in Easton. I had texted Patrice about something unrelated that afternoon, and she had responded without any background noise or indication she was in a shopping center. When I had mentioned casually to my wife that I had texted Patrice, she had shifted the story slightly, said they had stopped somewhere for coffee by then. Patrice knew. Patrice had been helping her. I did not confront Patrice, but I made a note of it, and I adjusted what I was willing to share her presence going forward. The third decision was the one that required the most patience. I waited. I know that sounds simple, but it was the hardest thing I did through this entire period. My wife came home from that conference on a Friday evening. She walked through the door, set down her bag, and hugged me. She told me the conference had been productive. She asked what I wanted to do for dinner. I said I was thinking about that Italian place we liked over in Worthington, and I watched her face with a kind of clinical attention I had never applied to her before. There was a flicker. Half a second. Then she said that sounded great and went upstairs to change. We had dinner. She talked about the conference. I asked questions. I was present and engaged and gave her nothing. On the drive home, she held my hand across the center console, the way she had done since we were dating, and I let her, because I had already decided that I would not give her the satisfaction of knowing that I knew. Not yet. Not until I was ready. I spent the next 3 weeks completing every preparation I had started. I retained my attorney formally and paid the initial retainer. I identified which assets were clearly mine, which were joint, and which carried complications. I contacted my bank separately and opened an individual checking account. I redirected my direct deposit to that account with 2 weeks' notice, time to land just after the conversation I was planning to have. I wrote a letter to Dwight's wife. I want to be precise about this. Dwight was divorced, so there was no wife to write to. But I did learn through his public LinkedIn and a brief online search that he had a business partner, a man who had co-founded his commercial real estate firm, and that this partner was also a personal friend. I prepared a factual summary of what I had documented, without embellishment or emotion, and I set it aside. I would decide later whether to send it. On a Thursday evening in late May, 3 months after I had seen my wife's car in that parking lot, I came home from work and sat down at the kitchen table. My wife was making dinner. Biscuit was lying in the hallway. The oak tree in the front yard was full and green with late spring. Everything looked exactly like it always had. I said her name. She turned from the stove with a spatula in her hand and a mild domestic expression on her face, and I said, quietly and without any particular drama, that I needed to talk to her. I told her I knew about Dwight. I told her I knew about the Tuesday and Thursday evenings in Worthington. I told her I knew about the conference. I told her I had known for several months and had spent that time preparing rather than reacting, because I was not the kind of man who makes decisions in the middle of emotions he cannot control. She did not deny it. What she did was set the spatula down very carefully on the counter and begin to cry. She said she was sorry. She said she had not meant for it to happen. She said it had started as nothing and had become something before she understood what it was. She used every sentence that people use in those moments, and I listened to all of them. And when she finished, I told her I appreciated her honesty now, even though it was about 3 months late. She asked me if we could work through it. She asked about counseling. She said she would end it immediately, that it was already mostly over, that she had been trying to find a way to step back from it. I sat with all of that, and I felt the weight of 21 years pressing on the moment, and I told her the truth. I told her that I had loved her without reservation for the entirety of our marriage, that I had not been a perfect husband, but that I had been a faithful one, that I had never in 21 years put another woman ahead of her in any way that mattered, and that what she had done, and more than what she had done, the months of looking me in the eye across the dinner table while it was ongoing, had closed something in me that I did not believe could be reopened. She asked me what I was saying. I told her I had already spoken to an attorney, that I had organized our financial documentation, that I intended to file for divorce, and that I hoped we could conduct it with dignity, because we were both adults, and because there was enough history between us that we owed each other that much at the end. She cried for a long time. I made myself a plate from the dinner she had been cooking, and ate it at the kitchen table while she sat across from me with her hands folded and her face in pieces. I was not cold to her. I was not cruel. I simply had nothing left that resembled the emotional participation she was hoping for me. That part had been used up quietly over the previous 3 months of preparation. I slept in the guest room that night. I had already moved what I needed in there. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the house was painful in the particular way that endings are painful when both people still have to occupy the same space. She made several more attempts to revisit the possibility of reconciliation. Each time I listened, acknowledged what she said, and returned to my position. I was not going to be unkind to her, but I was also not going to pretend that 21 years of trust can be patched like a torn screen door. What I had not expected was the phone call from Patrice. She called me on a Saturday morning about 2 weeks after my conversation with my wife. I almost did not answer. When I did, she was clearly emotional. She told me she needed to tell me something. She said she had known about Dwight for 4 months. She said my wife had confided in her in January and had asked her not to say anything. She said she had convinced herself it was not her place to interfere. Then, she said she was sorry. She said she should have told me, that she had thought about it many times and that she had been wrong to stay silent. I appreciated her saying that. I told her so. I also told her that it changed nothing. It was not cruelty on my part, simply accuracy. The fact that she felt guilty did not undo the months in which I had been operating without information I should have had. I told her I wished her well and ended the call. The divorce was filed in June. My wife did not contest the primary terms. The house, because she was the one who had broken the marriage, became a point of real negotiation. We ultimately agreed to sell it and divide the equity. I was at peace with that. The house was only as meaningful as what had existed inside it, and that was gone. I moved into an apartment in Worthington, which I recognize as an odd detail given everything, but it was a good location and a fair price, and I decided I was not going to let geography carry emotional weight that it did not need to carry. I kept Biscuit. That was the one thing I was completely inflexible about. She had the good grace not to fight me on it. Biscuit slept at the foot of my bed in the apartment on the first night and on every night after. And I am not ashamed to tell you that on more than one occasion during that first year, I was grateful for the company in a way that I would have found embarrassing to articulate to another person. I am going to tell you what I learned from all of this. Not because I think I have particular wisdom, but because I spent a long time processing it and the conclusions feel worth saying out loud. The first is that dignity is a choice you have to make actively, especially when every instinct is pushing you towards something louder. There were moments during those 3 months of preparation when I wanted to drive to Worthington and knock on a door and say things I could not take back. I did not do that. I am glad I did not do that. The manner in which you end something that was important to you says something permanent about who you are, and I did not want the end of my marriage to say something about me that was not true. The second is about the grief. People expect grief from divorce to arrive all at once, like a storm. Mine came in small pieces, distributed across a very long time. It came when I sold the house and saw the oak tree from the moving truck window. It came the first Thanksgiving I spent at my brother's place in Ghana, setting an extra chair at a table that used to need it at a different house. It still comes sometimes, quietly and without warning. I have learned to let it arrive and pass without making too much of it in either direction. The third is the one I think matters most. I did not lose myself in this. I was afraid for a while that I would. That the discovery of what had been happening inside my own marriage, in rooms I trusted, would do something permanent to my capacity to extend good faith to another person. I watched for that in myself. When I recognized it trying to take hold, I made deliberate choices in the other direction. I stayed connected to friends. I made plans. I found, after some time, that I was capable of sitting across a table from someone new and being genuinely interested in who they were, without the weight of suspicion that I thought might be permanent. That, more than anything else, is what I am most glad about. Not the clean financial settlement, not the organized documentation, not even Biscuit, though Biscuit is a significant silver lining in any accounting of this situation. What I am most glad about is that the version of me who sat in that kitchen on a May evening and spoke plainly to a woman who had been lying to him for months was recognizably the same person who had walked into that marriage 21 years earlier. Someone who could be hurt, but not hollowed out. Someone who could end something painful with his hands clean and his head level and his sense of his own character intact. That is what I kept. That is what she could not take even while she was taking other things. And that, if I am being honest, is more than enough.